Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Progress Towards 100% Clean Energy, a State Leaders Roundtable. We have a really exciting panel of speakers today, and I should also say this webinar is presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance on behalf of the 100% Clean Energy Collaborative, and you'll learn more about all of that in just a moment. Before we get started, some very quick webinar logistics. You can use the orange arrow that you see circled here to either expand or minimize your webinar console. We encourage you to ask questions, type in your questions and comments throughout the webinar, and we will save about 15 minutes following our panel discussion for a Q&A with the audience. Finally, we are recording this webinar. We will send a copy of the recording to you within 48 hours, and we'll also post it on our website at cisa.org/webinars. And for more information about the 100% Collaborative, you can visit cisa.org/100. So with that, I will now pass it over to CISA Executive Director Warren Leon.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining today. We have a great panel of state leaders from across the country. As you know, the states have really been in the lead in moving this country away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy. Many states have adopted 100% clean energy goals. Today, we've brought some of the leaders from some of the leading states together to talk to you about how things have been going with their efforts at the state level, how that relates to what's going on at the national level. And before we actually start the discussion, let's go to the next slide. And this webinar is being brought to you by the Clean Energy States Alliance. And you can see here some of our members, which are state energy agencies primarily across the country. We work especially with them, but on various projects we work with all states. And if we go to the next slide, one of the projects we've been working on is we're not flipping to it, but I'll tell you, there we are. Advancing Towards 100% Clean Energy, a state federal summit coming up in just a few short weeks in Washington, D.C. It's still time to register. Registration closes on Monday. This is an event brought to you by CISA, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and the U.S. Department of Energy. And we decided to hold this discussion today to set the stage for that event in D.C., where we're going to be focusing specifically on the relationship between state clean energy efforts and national efforts. But we thought it would be useful to first hear what some state leaders think about what's going on. If we can go to the next slide. We can see here who's on the call and who's going to be in the discussion. Bryan Garcia, president of the Connecticut Green Bank, David Hochschild, chair of the California Energy Commission, Louise Martinez, who wins the award for the longest title here, director of Energy Conservation Management Division at the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, Zach Pierce, senior advisor for climate change policy for the Office of North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. And the last person is a surprise guest. Michelle Granzi from Minnesota was supposed to be on this call, but unfortunately she's feeling under the weather today. So Pete Wyckoff has stepped in. He's Assistant Commissioner for Federal and State Energy Initiatives at the Minnesota Department of Commerce. We're going to do this as a discussion. I'm going to throw out questions to folks. They will be responding with insightful and pithy answers. And then after a while, probably after about 40 minutes, we'll turn it over to your questions from the audience. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in. Let me start with one question, and we're going to do this one, ask everybody to respond to it. And we'll just do this in alphabetical order. We know your state's trying to move towards 100% clean energy. What's one way in which you think your state is actually making meaningful progress? Bryan.
All right. Well, Warren, Sam, thank you for pulling this all together. CISA team, it's great to be back with you all. Looking forward to the summit in May. I know I'm sending a bunch of my staff there to catch up. Lots of stuff happening on the federal level. Lots of things that I feel like every week something's coming out. But I think broadly, having good public policy matters. In the state of Connecticut, for example, we started off actually with a regional collaboration, Resolution 26-4 of the New England Governors and Eastern Canadian Premiers, actually back in 2001, actually established the first regional greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. 10%, let's see, 1990 levels by 2010, 10% below 1990 by 2020, which we hit. Let's see, 80% reduction by the year 2050. So those were embodied in the regional that then got built into our statute. So Public Act 0898, the Global Warming Solutions Act, took those regional commitments and embodied them into Connecticut policy. Then we passed several years ago a greenhouse gas reduction target of a reduction of 45% below 2001 levels by 2030, which is consistent with the White House's 50 to 52% reduction. And then last year, we passed our zero carbon electric sector target by 2040. So policy matters. That sets the context for then how everything gets rolled out.
Hey, thanks very much. And one thing I should have mentioned to folks in the audience, this is a very distinguished group of panelists. I didn't go into all their backgrounds, but if you look in the chat, you'll see a link to a website where you could see all of their bios. So, David Hochschild, what's one way you think your state's making meaningful progress?
Well, for one thing, alternative energy is really the wrong word to use to describe renewables in California. We're getting 60% of our electricity from carbon-free sources today. And last September, the governor signed legislation which now mandates we get to 90% carbon-free by 2035, which is just 12 years away. And of course, along with many of the states on the call here, to get to 100% by 2045. And I do want to say, you know, this is a situation in which we're all kind of rooting for each other. You know, we're all from different states, but we all have the same goal. And one thing that's been just a great pleasure to finally have the winds at our back with the IRA. We've never had anything like, you know, 10-year tax credits for solar, for wind, for geothermal, for energy storage, for electric vehicles, electric heat pumps, an incredible boost to all of our state policies. So we are definitely moving faster than we've ever moved before. And I would say, in addition to greening the grid, we're also expanding the reach of that clean electricity into all these other sectors. And we're adding now about 1,000 electric vehicles a day to the roads in California. And in the fourth quarter of 2022, we reached 23% of new vehicle sales being electric. So a lot of good momentum happening, and certainly going faster because of the federal government leading on climate finally.
Thanks. Louise Martinez, what's the situation in New Mexico?
Well, the situation in New Mexico is very similar to my other two colleagues here. New Mexico really has taken a real leadership role, I think, in working towards making our environment the most important part of our work, and climate change. And based on that, our Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, in the first year of her administration, passed and enacted the Energy Transition Act. That requires 100% zero carbon electricity by 2050. On top of that, she also issued an executive order to address climate change and energy waste prevention. And based on that, she has a 45% target by 2030, compared to 2005 levels. And to get that done, she also has established two task forces. One is the Climate Change Task Force that provides strategic direction and convenes state agencies to achieve greenhouse gas reduction targets. She also passed the sustainability, enacted the sustainability task force that will make that effort sustainable, which is really important for all of this. Top of that, New Mexico also has a grid modernization roadmap that we have been working on, which is really critical to be able to figure out how our grid can take on the clean energy that's necessary and that it is reliable and efficient and affordable. She has also signed into law tax credits that help us to help the customer in New Mexico residential to bring in residential solar. And our state land office has really taken off in leasing land for renewable energy development. It is really important to note that they have increased their revenues from wind and solar leases from 800,000 revenue in 2018 to 12 million in 2020. That's substantial. On top of that, we are an energy exporter, and we are providing that renewable energy that California really is looking for. And I think we need to be able to say that if we were to use New Mexico's renewable energy resources, our target for the ETA, we would be about at 63% right now. So we're doing a lot to move us forward to clean energy.
Hey, thank you. And Zach Pierce, tell us about North Carolina. What's one way in which you think your state is making progress?
Thanks for the question, Warren. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay, great. Well, since you promised pithy and insightful answers, I'll choose just one highlight. But needless to say, under Governor Cooper's leadership, there's been a lot of exciting work across our economic sectors to reduce emissions and deploy clean energy solutions. And I know we'll have an opportunity to get into more of those this afternoon. But my highlight will be an executive order that the governor issued last fall, Executive Order 271, focused on supporting the transition to zero emission vehicles, specifically in the medium and heavy duty sector. We know that this transition is a big opportunity to achieve the governor's environmental justice and public health objectives, as well as our climate objectives, but it's also a really exciting economic opportunity. North Carolina is a long-standing leader in the manufacturing and supply chain development of medium and heavy duty vehicles. And this executive order really is positioned to make sure that we remain at the forefront and ensure that we're securing local economic benefits as a result of this global market transition. And so the order includes a number of provisions. It kicks off the development of an advanced clean trucks rule for North Carolina, first in the Southeast to pursue this effort, but also takes a number of steps to support an efficient and affordable market transition to complement the regulatory approach. And so I won't go into detail on all of those, but we're moving on a number of fronts, ranging from conducting an updated zero emission vehicle charging infrastructure and fueling infrastructure needs assessment to start to think about those key gaps and investment needs as we build out the support infrastructure for these vehicles, looking more closely at matching the appropriate federal funding with opportunities in the medium and heavy duty sector specifically. This is one of the highlights of the Inflation Reduction Act. I think the fact that there are both targeted programs and discretionary programs that can be used to invest in the charging infrastructure for these vehicles, purchase incentive for these vehicles, workforce development to support the market transition, and then a fair amount of work updating our data and mapping and understanding of the disproportionate local air impacts of our medium and heavy duty trucks, especially on our communities of color, low-income communities, and other historically underserved communities that are most frequently living and working in proximity to these vehicles. And so this is just one subsector within the transportation sector, but a really enormous opportunity, as I said, to move forward with the governor's economic development objectives, our public health and environmental justice objectives, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, which is now the leading source in the state.
Hey, thanks very much. Pete Wyckoff from Minnesota, what's one way in which you think your state's making progress?
So thanks for having me. We have a state that is either cursed or blessed by having no fossil fuel resources, but we have lots of good wind. We have lots of good solar, which may not be nationally known, but we are cold, but those cold days are very sunny. And we have good biomass resources. So we have the feedstocks you need for good homegrown energy. Our utilities have been national leaders for a while in the adoption of renewables, driven by wind being the low cost way to add capacity to our system. And we were at one point a national leader on state policy in the electric sector, and we have recently become a national leader again. So I'm excited about that. Governor Walz was elected to a second term last fall, and somewhat surprisingly, emerged also with a legislature that wanted to do some open field running on climate legislation. We're still in the middle of session, so it's not all done, but we've already passed some big things. The centerpiece is 100% by 2040 clean electricity standard, which I think takes us back into among the national leaders, many of whom are on this call. The other thing we just passed, which I'm excited about, I was a Senate staffer until a month ago, is something called the State Competitiveness Fund, which will be a program to provide state funds to leverage IIJA and IRA federal opportunities. So there's a nice synergy between what the incentives available from the federal government and the ambition that our state, led by Governor Walz, has in terms of climate progress. So,
thank you. So let's look at a slightly different question. And in terms of answers, we will go in reverse alphabetical order by last name this time. And, you know, we know that not everything that reduces carbon and addresses climate change is popular with the public. And not everything that's popular with the public reduces carbon. What's one example of something you're doing in your state, in this case, Minnesota, Pete, that relates to your state's decarbonization efforts where you feel you're receiving strong public support from the public?
So I think the 2040 law is something that Minnesotans are getting behind and have always been behind, and it's been a relatively easy sell. The expansion of our wind industry, which has brought tremendous benefits, and as our solar industry expands, I mean, the public surveys show these are very popular developments. You know, Minnesota is also moving fast on clean cars. I think there's some more trepidation there, but also a lot of public enthusiasm for making that transition.
Zach, in North Carolina, what's one thing that you think is receiving strong public support?
Yeah, so the highlight that I would bring to the table is in our power sector. So just as a little bit of background, North Carolina has divided government and over a year ago passed a bipartisan piece of legislation setting power sector emissions targets for the state. So 70% reduction by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. This is a really important step forward for the state. There's obviously a lot of complication and nuance in implementing those statutory directives, but I think the bipartisan nature of that legislation, which stemmed from a clean energy plan that was developed over a number of years that convened stakeholders from across the state to develop the targets, it really reflects the broad support that we have for this transition in the electricity sector, not just in terms of what it means for ratepayer bills, but also the economic development that we're seeing in these new industries. Obviously, longstanding presence of the solar industry in the state, an exciting new growth of offshore wind and associated development up and down the supply chain.
Thank you. Louise, New Mexico, what's one aspect of your efforts there that you think has strong public support?
I would say that New Mexico really has a lot of incentives that are being provided to a regular New Mexican. And one of them is the Solar Market Development Tax Credit Program. That really has taken off. Is such interest in being able for the resident to be able to take advantage of using solar. Our solar program started out with $8 million a year. We have surpassed in applications the 8 million for 2 years, and this year we've passed 12 million, with leaving a lot of applicants without being able to get their tax credit. And it's very popular. New Mexicans are very interested in using the natural resource that we have available to us. And I think the other way that I would say is it's important for us as we're going forward with renewable energy and clean energy that we also look at diversifying our economy. It's really important to New Mexicans that we have another source of revenue to come in. And that's why I mentioned earlier the state land office revenue impact that they're having on our state by allowing for wind and solar development in our state.
Thank you. David, California.
Yeah,
There must be something popular there.
Yeah, I would agree with Louise. I think generally, clean air is very popular, and clean energy and clean technologies are seen as a way to get to a cleaner air and a cleaner environment. But where it's most powerful is where, as Louise was saying, where people can see an economic opportunity and really sort of economic hope, I think, for the next generation. And so for us in California, one of the big pieces that has been electric vehicles. The Tesla factory in Fremont is now manufacturing over 2,000 electric vehicles a day. It's the most productive auto manufacturing facility in the United States. And you see more and more electric vehicles all over every day. And the governor has an executive order. We're driving towards 100% of new vehicle sales to be electric by 2035. And so that's one of the most visible things. I think that's just really popular because, if you've grown up with smog, clean air sounds a lot better. So to be able to clean the air and see a sort of vibrant, part of the economy continue to thrive is really, I think, driving that popularity.
Great. And Bryan, how about Connecticut and what's popular there?
So just building on David and Zach's point, I just want to say really cool to see how environmental policy is good industrial policy, right? I think that's a really important thing for all of us to see and recognize. Louise, I totally agree. Like in opinion maps here in the state of Connecticut, it's, providing those incentives for energy efficient vehicles or solar panels. So in our case, decarbonizing the electric sector, there are a variety of ways of doing it. One of the big ones, having been, a deregulated state, is residential solar. I'm not sure how all of your states are dealing with rising electric rates, but we were hit as a result of the war in the Ukraine and, winter here in Connecticut and our over-reliance on natural gas with rising electric rates. So we went from 25 cents to 37 cents in our standard offer in Connecticut, which just added more fuel to the fire, so to speak, for households to pursue residential solar. I mean, already we were the largest watt per capita deployer of residential solar in the Northeast, but now with this behind us, it's like people are like, tired of it. They want to put their energy costs in their own hands. And, it's cool to see our most vulnerable, our low to moderate income families pursuing solar and getting access to solar so that they can protect themselves against all of these things that we're facing in terms of energy price risk, inflation, all those sorts of things. So residential solar, big one.
Great, thanks. So there are some aspects of the decarbonization effort that are obviously popular. There are ways, as we've heard, you're making good progress, but we don't want to be Pollyanna-ish. What's a challenge? What is standing in the way of making greater progress toward decarbonizing your state's energy system? Who wants to step in on that?
I would say for us in California, there's sort of two big, I would call them sort of energy dances that we have to kind of navigate successfully over the next decade. The first is, how do you support grid reliability when you're electrifying everything? Because we're not just electrifying transportation, but we're also electrifying the building sector and moving beyond natural gas to electric heat pump technology, electrifying rail. And so electric demand is going up as the grid's getting cleaner. And so we have to put huge amounts of energy storage on. We've increased energy storage about 20-fold in the last 3 years, from 250 megawatts to about 5,000 megawatts since 2019. But that challenge continues because also it's getting hotter, and we've had extended heat storms that drives up energy demand, air conditioning. So that dance has to be navigated, and it's not easy. And the other one is, how do you ensure sufficient refinery capacity to serve the gasoline market as we're gradually reducing gasoline demand? And it is sort of a stair step. Periodically there are refineries coming offline, but so we can go from being half a refinery long to half a refinery short, and that can create some pressure. So those are kind of what we're navigating, because we're really, both those have to be managed really, really carefully. And I think they are both manageable, but it's a tricky balance.
Who wants to join in, who has a different challenge you want to raise beyond the couple that David talked about in California?
Yeah, I might jump in and say two things we're already dealing with in Minnesota is strains on the transmission and distribution systems. We already are seeing these strains, and we want to build out in a rapid manner much more in terms of our wind and solar. So that's going to be a challenge. We have workforce issues, everybody does, but with unemployment this low and a changing skill sets that might be demanded as the energy system changes, that's going to be hard to deal with. And the other thing, and though not maybe as severe here as in some other places, but we really have, we're moving from a past that had coal plants and some other types of plants that were centrally located in a community, and not always the best place or the most likely place to put new types of generators. Though I think we can point to a recent success as we moved to shut down the largest coal plant near the Twin Cities. There was a recent agreement funded, fueled by the IRA, to put a lot of solar in that same spot, taking advantage of those same wires.
Thanks. Any other challenges?
This is Bryan. Maybe this is a bit wonky, but in the area of greenhouse gas accounting, so production versus consumption-based accounting. So as an example, here in Connecticut, I noted earlier that we met our 2020 target from a consumption-based accounting. So we were 12% below 2001 levels by 2020. But if we looked at the production-based accounting, we actually don't meet our target. So this is all to say, like, when you have a renewable portfolio standard and you are helping to cite renewable projects in other states, where that environmental attribute resides matters in terms of the accounting. The other state may count the renewables towards their targets, but that environmental attribute may reside in another state. So this notion of production and consumption-based accounting, I think, is something for us to wrap our minds around. Nuclear power is a big one. We procure 50% of our power from a local nuclear power plant, but we own 100% of the environmental attributes. So this notion of where these attributes reside, I think, is an interesting one.
Warren,
I think you're muted.
Hey,
What you
Warren,
could do, Warren, is click on phone call on the audio box and then click back on computer audio. That sometimes resets it.
we can't hear. I think we're flying blind here, guys. we have to channel Warren. All right, I'll ask a question. How are you guys addressing equity in your programs and trying to lift up disadvantaged communities with your climate strategies?
I can jump on this one, David. Thanks for taking over the steering wheel there. This is obviously a really important topic. It shows up in a lot of different ways. We have state executive action in North Carolina where the governor has clearly articulated a commitment both in policy design and investment priorities, making sure that we are prioritizing benefits in historically underserved communities. There's also, I think, one of the highlights of the federal funding regime, all of the provisions built into both the Justice 40 initiative, but also specific programs. I think one of the exciting developments that we're seeing at the state level, which is a precursor to really meaningful work across the state, is more clarity and uniformity around both definitions and mapping and who exactly we're talking about and what tools we're using, so that when we have federal resources, for example, to invest in clean school buses, electric school buses in a school district, or new charging infrastructure, we're getting a lot more specific about the criteria by which we're implementing a stated policy desire to make sure that a disproportionate amount of the benefits go to communities that have been historically underserved. So this is an area where, you know, it feels like we're both making a lot of progress and have a lot of work to do. But I do think between some of the governor's executive action and the federal leadership we're seeing both from Congress and the IRA and the Biden administration, there's a lot of tailwinds.
Hey,
and
thanks. Can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah, we were telling you, Warren.
Thanks for jumping in. Louise, you want to say anything about advice for folks around environmental justice and addressing energy inequities?
The only thing I was going to add to that is that has become a really focused part of the work that's being done with clean energy here in New Mexico. We did convene a group of stakeholders, including tribes throughout our state. We are one of those states that's very rich with different cultures, and also we have a community of a lot of disadvantaged communities that we need to serve. So we came up with the task force, the climate task force came up with guidelines as to how we're going to handle, how can we be working with those disadvantaged communities? What are our principles for that? And I'm very pleased that we've gotten this far, and we hope we can get a little bit further with that.
I'd add,
Bryan, Pete, go.
I'd add similar from Minnesota. To pick up on what Zach said, I think the emphasis on environmental justice in the IRA incentives very much meshes well with the state of Minnesota's priorities, Governor Walz's priorities. I think I mentioned there was a rich stakeholder process to update and greatly expand our state climate plan last fall. Environmental justice is a big emphasis, and I think, Justice 40 works for our state priorities as well as for the federal priorities.
I was just going to add that I think we're in a really, really important and necessary transition in how we're thinking about climate change. You know, our former objective was something along the lines of, you know, maximizing greenhouse gas emission reductions per dollar of investment. I feel like we're now heading towards rightly, and I'm really excited. We're all really excited by it, which is maximizing the amount of investment in however we define them, low income and disadvantaged communities, vulnerable communities, whatever, per ton of CO2 reduced, right? So we're in that transition, recognizing that decarbonization and environmental justice are like a helix, like a DNA, right? They're intertwined. Like it doesn't, you know, you can't have environmentalism without humanitarianism. So we're in that moment right now, and the federal policies are really unlocking that and helping our states continue to move in that direction. So really important time, cool stuff going on.
But, well, one of the other things that makes this an important time is the fact that there are much greater federal resources available to address climate change. And I know lots of states are looking forward to receiving greater financial support from the federal government in relationship to the Inflation Reduction Act. But do any of you want to be more specific about ways in which you think the Inflation Reduction Act will be particularly useful to your state?
I'll take a stab.
I-
Yeah. Like, so I'd be remiss if I didn't want to talk about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. But I feel like as we are looking at deploying these technologies, whether it's weatherizing your home, whether it's putting solar on your rooftops or installing a battery for backup, in general, when we've thought about these technologies in the past, you know, which can be expensive and in a lot of cases inaccessible for many, we have to find ways to make those technologies accessible for the many. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund really embodies that, and it's really exciting. It's the single largest investment in climate and environmental justice in the history of this country. There's a $14 billion National Clean Investment Fund, a $6 billion Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, and a $7 billion Solar for All program. All have really different and intriguing aspects to it. So all of your states out there should look into it. How we use limited public resources to mobilize private investment for the most vulnerable is really going to help us address our climate challenges. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, big one.
Yes, I completely agree with Bryan on that. We're here to serve our citizens, and this IRA and IIJA funding, it gives us the perfect opportunity to be able to provide the most benefit to those that have never been able to see the full picture, to be able to take advantage of renewable energy, to take advantage even of energy efficiency. So leveraging state and federal resources with private resources, that's the key to making this really a holistic approach to making a difference in our country.
Yeah, I can chime in and reiterate both the previous comments. I mean, I'm sure there's a shared consensus on this line that we will not realize the full potential of the federal funding if we, you know, merely make a one-time investment in clean energy technologies and then kind of go back to our day jobs. This is about thinking strategically about ways that public investment can help to unlock and scale these markets, and also direct resources to those communities that are going to benefit the most. So that's definitely the prism by which we're thinking about it. In North Carolina, we're in a unique situation because the state has done a lot of, I think, the prerequisite planning needed to be thoughtful stewards of these resources, but we haven't necessarily had the state investment opportunity to deploy many of these strategies. And so now we're in this moment where we can meet the priorities with resources at the federal level and really mobilize much of the planning and stakeholder work we've done over the last 6 years. And then the one program I would call out that we're very excited about is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. So this is a program that affords planning money to states and other government entities across the country to identify greenhouse gas reduction measures, and then states are able to compete for an additional $4.65 billion to implement those greenhouse gas reduction measures. The planning process also is going to equip North Carolina to look across all of the federal funding programs to say, what are our needs and what's that matchmaking on the most appropriate programs to mobilize those needs. So we're really excited about that as I think an organizing force in approaching all of the federal funding.
One other point I'd add to that is I think the defining feature of the clean energy revolution is that it's by definition much less centralized and much more distributed. And so, the action that the Inflation Reduction Act accelerates is not just central procurement by utilities for solar and wind and geothermal, which is centralized, but also, for customers. And it places this incredible power of a tax credit, an incentive, in the hands of people. So you can put solar on your roof and get a 30% tax credit. You can install an energy storage system. You can get high efficiency windows and electric heat pump technology, electric vehicles, and all these customer decisions made by millions of individuals are being really significantly affected by this law. And I will say, I think this has been the most productive first 2 years of any president since Roosevelt. And among many big bills, the Inflation Reduction Act, I think, is much more significant than the infrastructure law because of the transformational effect it's going to have on these industries, automotive and energy. And that's really driven in large part by all these customer decisions, individual customer decisions that are really just now tilted towards clean sources of energy. And just, I'll just say, just watching around California, how many people are now getting solar roofs and energy, electric vehicles. And I mean, the market's been taken off, like nothing we've ever seen before.
I would build on that a little bit and also return to Warren. I think your question was, how is the IRA going to help your state citizens? Our largest utility already has calculated that just with their current IRP, the IRA incentives will save ratepayers over $1 billion. So, I mean, that's nothing but good from the state's perspective, right? But that's with the current pre-IRA planning. So when you add possible new ambition that is supported by the IRA, it brings even more savings. I think going off of what David said, one of the challenges, and having just come from Washington back from Minnesota, having been there for the putting together of the IRA, I think one of the challenges that our state, and I think every state is getting their head around, is that this is not mostly a grant-based bill. I think there's about $110 billion in grants in the bill. It is mostly a tax credit-based bill, and what has not been mentioned, a guaranteed federal loan authority-based bill. In the loan guarantee category, there's over $400 billion in federal loan guarantee authority for clean energy transition projects in this bill. And I think in Minnesota, we are trying to get our head around how to incentivize these tax credits and how to incentivize the use of federally backed loans. That's not the usual thing. The usual thing is there's a grant, we'll go out and get it. So I think it raises new challenges.
Just a quick point, building off of Pete's point there for the audience, because it's a really important one on the loan program office, is there's also a provision supporting state energy financing institutions, which essentially allows the LPO to support commercially available technologies when developers are partnering with states. So all of us should be very encouraging of developers who are out there who want to use the loan program office to lower their cost of capital, because what that will mean is it should mean more deployment in our respective states. So to Pete's point, a lot of federal resources going into that loan program. Use them, they're out there. So good stuff.
So there's a lot good in the IRA, also a lot good in the bipartisan infrastructure law. You've pointed out a number of the specific programs and provisions that you think will be valuable. Is there anything else you want from the federal government? Any other ways in which they could be more helpful, or they could provide technical assistance or closer cooperation, or is it all good?
I'll speak up to that and just basically say, the same way that we need to collaborate amongst states and amongst our local communities, I think the federal government also needs to step up in helping to push the development of renewable energy, of clean energy technologies out there, like streamlining permitting processes. I mean, we here in New Mexico have seen that it takes decades to get a transmission line built. And isn't that what we want? Don't we want to all be connected? So I think permitting is something that the federal government should really look at, not to take away any environmental requirements, but how can this be streamlined? I think that is important for clean energy development.
One other thing I would put out there, I think is really a call to action is I think we have got to do a better job telling the success stories. You know, when I think about, for example, over the last 20 years, you know, what's the best known energy project? It's Solyndra, which was a failed solar company, but that was in the context actually when the solar industry was growing. Solyndra failed because other solar companies were lower cost and growing fast. And, you know, solar and wind are the two lowest cost, fastest growing energy industries in the world. And somehow we haven't done enough to kind of communicate the economic benefits. I mean, the largest IPO in the market this year is a American solar company, California, you know, Nextracker. And when I think just in our state, we've gotten so much criticism that, oh, you do these clean energy policies, it's going to be terrible for the economy. We've been hearing that for 10 years. Well, 10 years ago, we were the 10th biggest economy in the world, and now we're the 5th biggest economy in the world. This year, we're going to pass Germany to be the 4th biggest. And I just feel like we've done an insufficient job of telling the success stories and the benefits to the public in a way that really flips the script, because actually all this work we're all doing is really seed planting for the economy of the future. And the sooner we begin, the better position we'll be and the more competitive we'll be. And the less, you know, we're likely to end up, you know, dependent on, you know, Saudi Arabia and so forth for our fuel. So I just feel like that narrative has got to be, well, we all have to own it, but especially at the national level.
Thank you. Let me turn to one of the questions that came in from the audience. As we're making this transition to clean energy, how much are you concerned about and thinking about reliability and resilience? And if you are, what are you doing about it?
I can speak to that just because we've been laser focused on reliability. So two things I'd say. One is that energy storage itself has a huge role to play, and we're scaling that really faster than anywhere else in the world. As I mentioned, we've gone from 250 megawatts in 2019 to 5,000 megawatts today, en route to 15,000 megawatts by 2030. But in addition to that, you know, recognizing the potential for everything that connects to the grid to be a good citizen of the grid. There's so many grid interactive technologies now that we can deploy that will help support reliability. And as I said, we had a 9-day heat storm last September, and a heat storm is the right term. It's not a heat wave. It really should be understood like a natural disaster because the pressure that applies, and it stressed the grid. We have the highest energy use in the history of the state. And we kept the lights on because of these strategies, but we're having to, you know, focus a lot of resources on just getting prepped for these extended heat events. I think grid reliability is a 100% solvable problem. It just is a matter of getting enough, you know, resources interconnected and being smart about, you know, grid interactive technology to make sure we're making everything that can be flexible is being aligned to support our peak demand.
Another example I'd throw out there is just in the electric vehicle space. So North Carolina has seen I mean, like every state, or most states, an exciting increase in the adoption of electric vehicles. 3 or 4 years ago, we were below 1% sales share for EVs, and Q4 of last year, we surpassed 6%. We're seeing those numbers continue to increase. But as we're building out charging infrastructure and investing state funds in that infrastructure through the federal programs like NEVI, there's been a lot of conversation around and focus on our evacuation routes around our coastal communities. And this is I think just a good example of a layer of this. As we talk about this scale of technology transition, there's a lot of troubleshooting that needs to take place. And so we're integrating some of those resiliency principles specific to coastal evacuation routes into the deployment of public funding. So we make sure that we maintain those backbones in emergency events.
Well, let me switch to another question from the audience. What do you see as the role for the voluntary market in achieving your state objectives? How important are corporate and institutional investments in clean energy? Does that help lead to lower compliance costs on the regulatory side, or are you not thinking about this much?
Good question, Warren. That's a great question for the audience. No, I think these types of corporate commitments, community commitments, things that are like beyond compliance, beyond a renewable portfolio standard, always helps because it helps pull those standards, more to the direction we want them to go. So to the extent there are more corporates for climate reasons or human resource reasons to get their employees to pursue these sorts of things, all of that is really, really important. I would say, going beyond the corporation's procurement, why not also think about an employee benefit program where you help your employees? So you think about healthcare, why not have a sustainability benefit and help your employees do it too? So continue to innovate out there in corporations. It only helps pull the policies through as well.
Great. Well, we have 7 minutes left to this webinar. What I want to do is give each of you about 75 seconds to say whatever you would like to say that you haven't had a chance to say up till now, or to reiterate a point, what you want to say to folks from all the other states across the country about what your state is up to, what its priorities are, and how you're thinking about the clean energy transition. Who'd like to go first? If not, I will go. I haven't thought of this. We'll go in.
I can jump in.
Sorry, was somebody going to go?
I can jump in.
Okay, please.
I'll kick us off. So I'm going to crib a little bit on David's remarks just about the economic trajectory of solar, wind energy, battery storage, and what it's meant for California's economy. And as I mentioned, North Carolina is a politically divided state. We've got a lot of different perspectives out there. And I remember working on climate and clean energy policy at a time where it was more, I think, easily framed as zero sum, pitting environmental and public health progress against economic development or energy security. And from where I'm sitting in a state like North Carolina, I do think we're in this really exciting moment where clean energy just makes sense. It's a broad value proposition. We're literally building, manufacturing these technologies in our backyards. Take the transportation sector as an example. We have battery manufacturers, we have the vehicle assembly plants, microchip manufacturers, development up and down the supply chain, clean aviation, electric boating. I mean, literally all aspects of that value chain. At the same time, we're seeing this progress reduce emissions from our top emitting sector in the state and reducing local air pollution that certainly harms all of us, but especially those low-income communities and communities of color that are disproportionately impacted. And so I think this confluence of co-benefits really allows for significant progress, not just in the leading states in the country, but every state, as you see this healthy race to the top. We have the battery belt being built across the southeast of the U.S. For vehicle manufacturing, and there's just a lot of alignment. So that's one takeaway that I would highlight, because I think it's a notable departure from the trajectory of this work over the last decade.
Hey, thank you. Pete, what do you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I'll pick up on what Zach said, and I'm glad that you have, the coastal blue states that have led this for a while, but I'm glad that you have the rest of us on here too, because I'm here to say the middle of America is also doing some open field running on this stuff. And I think the economic growth argument is a big part of why we're doing it. This is, if you took away the climate benefits, the chance to develop economically through this transition, and also, honestly, the chance to improve our public health through this transition are enough to do it alone, even if there was no climate benefit. So I think that those messages resonate in places all over the country, not just in the coast.
That's
with that.
Both an uplifting and important message to pass on. Thank you. And how about Louise? What would you like to say?
Louise, you're still on mute. Can you hear us?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't use my mouse today. But I do want to say that a lot of the same information that you guys are saying in all the states and everywhere that we're looking at clean energy, we're all in it together, guys. Just like in state government, we're all in it together. And the thing I want to point out is that we need to continue to reach out to our communities, because they are the most important part of this effort. Without our communities working with us to make this possible, to reach our goals, we're not going to get there. The competition doesn't really have to take place because we're all in it together, but we need to reach out to those communities that are so critical for all of us to reach our clean energy goals.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say I really thunderously agree with Louise's point. One team, one dream, really, and congratulations to all of you for all the progress you're pushing at the state level around the country, and to all those who are listening in today. I'll just close with a project I've been spending a lot of time on lately, which is offshore wind. So in December, we did the first lease sale for offshore wind on the west coast of the United States, and we set the state goal of 25 gigawatts. Which is over $100 billion of investment we're going to make in that technology. And we're actually hosting a conference. I'm very proud of this name. We're calling it On with the Wind, which we made. But, we are blessed with incredible natural resources, clean natural resources in the United States and in California, with the sun and the wind and geothermal and hydropower. And we're actually really lucky to have these resources. And the task ahead of us now is to just make use of that. And scale it up in a way that benefits society. And I really think we can do it. I feel like this moment we're in is, once in a generation kind of transformation, and it's exciting to be working on it. I wake up every day excited to do the work, and look forward to supporting all your progress as well, everyone else on the Zoom here.
Thanks. And Bryan, you get the last word.
Awesome. Well, I absolutely love this thread that we're going down, that good environmental policy is good industrial policy. It can be good for the economy. And if we go a step further, it can also be good social policy. So if we step back into the Biden policy principles, a zero carbon electric sector by 2035, a carbon neutral economy by 2050, that's the environmental policy, but it's also pushing the green economy. But now let's step into the people that he's putting out there, the social policy, right? Working towards a more perfect union. So you've got just transition, helping those who are coming from fossil to transition to the new technologies. And you've got Justice 40, So I had the great privilege of serving on the Secretary of Energy's advisory board, and yesterday she said something. I mean, she is such an incredibly inspirational, hopeful leader, and she said something that really struck me. She said, you know, we are an irresistible leader, and we truly are. Like, we're at this moment where everything's coming together, and we're working towards truly a more perfect union by bringing environment together with social equity together. You know, we're only going to be better for it as a country. So our states have a really important role to play in lifting up this green economy, and just good luck to you all at the summit. Deputy Secretary Turk is awesome. You all will enjoy him, and just have a great time continuing this conversation at the summit.
Hey, thanks to all of you, not just for your really insightful comments today, but all the leadership and work you are showing in your states. It truly is a moment of optimism and progress, and I look forward to talking about it with many of the folks on this call who will be attending the summit a couple of weeks from now in DC. Thanks very much, and I hope you all will join us on future webinars. Bye now.